Megan Trainer with Mother, and welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM, and it's time to take a look at an important issue which could be harming your wallet as well as your health. Joining me on the line is Katia Loisel. She is a body language and relationship expert, and we're talking about cuffing season, how to ditch some of those unhealthy habits in the supermarket, in particular with certain brands that you might be in a routine with purchasing where you don't need to be exactly. And Katia's here to tell us more on this. It's great to have you on the line. How are you?
Hello, so lovely. Thank you for having me on.
Well, Katia, before we get into it, why don't you just bring us in on your background, exactly what it is that you're sort of looking at here with regards to this topical issue, and just how you've been sort of tracking this over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, what's really interesting is I think for a lot of Australians, we are feeling the pinch at the moment, myself included. You know, I have two kids at home, and when you're trying to feed a family of four, it's getting tough because prices are going up, like doubling for some things. And it's actually, speaking to Australians, it's become really difficult for Australians to keep to budget. You know, a lot of people are going without. They're going without fresh vegetables. They're going without the things that they need. And that's really, you know, a lot of Australians are really feeling that. And so I guess what we've been talking about is the relationship that we have with our supermarket. You know, my background is in relationships, and in a lot of ways, the relationships that a lot of Australians have with their supermarket very much resembles tea relationship. You know, in unhealthy relationships, we don't feel heard. We feel drained for having spent time with them. You know, the partner blows hot and cold. And in a lot of ways, that's the sort of relationship or the partnership that we find ourselves in. And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of us feel stressed going to the supermarket, and Every Plate research has just revealed that 1 in 5 Australians actually feel stressed and overwhelmed when they're doing their shop. And it's no wonder, you know, it's difficult to find what you need. The prices are hiked up. And then you have, obviously, those yellow sales stickers. I like to call them yellow flags, because actually what happens is when you go into a supermarket and, you know, you've got this blowing hot and cold, you've got the prices going up, but at the same time, you've got these yellow sales stickers, and that actually triggers the dopamine center of our brain. It releases that feel-good dopamine. So we see 20 packets of Tim Tams and we put them into our trolley, even though we only went there for some milk. And, you know, that actually releases the feel-good dopamine associated with pleasure, addiction, reward. And, you know, that keeps us buying, and then we end up with a trolley full of $300 and we've completely blown our budget.
You know, you've made me really think long and hard about this, Katia, because I'm actually a victim of this myself. I mean, you sort of come across something that you become accustomed to thinking you need in the supermarket. You always rely on wanting to buy a certain amount of stocks of that product, and you feel as though you feel frustrated if you can't get your hands on it. It goes quicker than you think it should once you've bought it, and then you find yourself back in the supermarket before you know it. But honestly, what you've just said there is really, really, really fascinating. So we're talking about the exact same effect happening in the receptors of the brain, you know, the same thing as gambling and all those kinds of things, which really addict people. And I've got to say it works. There's no doubt it works, particularly in these times. So you're saying that people are really going over budget in the supermarket right now, when in actual fact they think they're doing themselves some kind of good by capitalising on these deals, but really it's just the supermarket's being quite clever, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, it's a marketing strategy. And the thing is, it's interesting that Every Plate research found that 60% of Aussies were prepared to end their partnership with their supermarket. And it's no wonder, you know, a quarter of South Australians feel that their supermarket doesn't care about them. And I guess when you're trying to, you know, stick to a budget and you can't, and you're blowing it each time, and you're giving up on, you know, going out and doing the things that you might want to do with your family simply because you can't afford, you know, to put a meal on the table, then we know we have a problem.
Katia Loisel, she'll give us her tips as to how to avoid overspending in the supermarket right after these messages. Stay tuned. It's the Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM. The song Waffle House from the Jonas Brothers, and welcome back. You're listening to the Country Viewpoint Tuesday edition on Flow FM. We're investigating cost of living and how to separate yourself from those unnecessary routines and habits that you can get yourself into when it comes to walking up and down the supermarket aisles. Well, Katia Loisel is in to tell us more about this, and she joined me earlier on, and here she is giving us her tips when it comes to avoiding overspending and buying things in the supermarket that you really don't need.
I guess my advice is if you find that you're stuck in a rut with your supermarket, familiarity breeds attraction. So we can stay in an unhealthy partnership, whether it's at work, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, with our supermarket for a long time, well past its use by date, simply because it's familiar and that's comfortable. And even if it's not good for us. So sometimes what we need to do is jump out of our comfort zone. So, that might just mean creating a list, sticking to what you absolutely need, never going to the supermarket on an empty stomach, or actually just having your meals delivered with a meal delivery kit service, like every plate where you get everything you need, nothing you don't. It's delivered to your door. You know exactly what you're spending each week, and you're not going to go in and buy a million things that you don't need, because I think that's what many of us are doing. And, also when times are tough, some people might just also be buying things that they don't need just for the emotional aspect of it, because of what we talked about, the dopamine aspect of it. And it's very difficult to avoid that cycle, unless you have a lot of willpower. I certainly don't. I don't know about you.
It's funny as well because, it's not like supermarkets are always overly pleasant kinds of places, Katia. I mean, you're not exactly going into artesian sort of aisles with someone playing a piano. They can be fairly anxiety-inducing. So if you can avoid being in these places, then I guess you're all the better for it again.
Look, absolutely. Sometimes you're going to have to go to the supermarket, there's no doubt. But I think that if we can avoid going, or at least avoid having to go as often, and really have the things that we need delivered to us when we can, that's definitely going to be more convenient. It's going to give us more consistency. It's going to help us stick to budget. And then we can spend the money on the things that we actually really, the things that make us feel happy, like spending time with our family and spending money on those things and building memories, rather than spending money on a bunch of things that you don't need. And that way you won't end up with 20 cans of tuna in your pantry that you're never going to eat.
So, Katia, tell us more about the case studies that you've got to go off, which just further highlights why people should rely on other alternatives which do not include supermarket trips.
What was really interesting was, we talked about the dopamine being released with those, yellow sales tickets. But actually it's interesting, particularly in South Australia, 1/5 of South Australians felt that they were actually being controlled by supermarkets. So it's really interesting that even though people might not necessarily understand the mechanics of how it works, a lot of people have that feeling that, it's almost like they're a puppet, being pulled along by sort of these marketing techniques. The case studies that we spoke to, you had a lovely woman, she had, 2 children, and she talked about not being able to, feed her family fresh vegetables because she just felt as though the prices kept going up. And, in supermarkets, particularly now, after COVID and since COVID, the prices, to buy fresh fruit and vegetables, they're pretty exorbitant. These are your basic things that everybody should be able to afford. And yet, she felt pretty upset about not actually being able to feed her family, that proper, 5 veggies and fruit each day. And then you had, a young student who, again, you just found himself going in for a couple of items and then coming out with a whole bunch of stuff that he didn't need. And I think that we're seeing that pattern, and we're seeing a sense of people just feeling as though they need to take control of their finances, of their budget. And, I guess where we buy our food is probably, one of the most, I guess that's one of our big ticket items in terms of our monthly expenses. So, it's important to get that under control.
That is Katia Loisel telling us all about cuffing season and why you should consider alternatives that do not concern supermarket trips. Been really interesting getting your insights and speaking with you, Katia. Just let our listeners know where they can go to engage with you further on this matter and more.
Yeah, well, they can go to everyplate.com.au.
As simple as that. Katia, really appreciate your time. All the best with everything. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Hope you have a great day.
More to come real soon on the Country Viewpoint. See you back here shortly.